In the heart of Marseille, France, a centuries-old statue of the Virgin Mary stood as a silent guardian over Place Saint-Ferréol. For over 400 years, she had watched over this bustling square, weathering wars, revolutions, and the changing face of a city that had become one of Europe's most diverse. But on August 15, 2025, the Feast of the Assumption, something happened that would shake not just this ancient city, but the entire world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones as vendors prepared their stalls around the perimeter. The statue, carved from pristine white marble in 1623, stood 12 feet tall on her granite pedestal, her gentle face turned toward the Mediterranean sky. Local historians often remarked that she had survived the plague of 1720, the bombardments of World War II, and countless storms that had battered the southern French coast. If you want to understand how religious tensions can explode in modern Europe, make sure to stay with us until the end of this incredible true story. Marie Dubois, a 67-year-old flower vendor, arranged her morning bouquets at the base of the statue as she had done every day for 32 years. She spoke softly to the marble figure in the local Provençal dialect, sharing the morning gossip and her concerns about her grandson's upcoming university exams. The ritual was as much a part of Marseille's daily rhythm as the ferry horns from the old port. The square buzzed with its usual morning energy. Café owners swept their terraces, preparing for the breakfast rush. Children from the nearby school crossed the square, their backpacks bouncing as they hurried to class. Islamic call to prayer echoed faintly from the Grande Mosquée de Marseille, 6 blocks away, blending with the cathedral bells in a symphony that had defined this multicultural city for decades. But tension had been building in Marseille throughout the summer of 2025. Economic pressures, rising unemployment, and inflammatory social media campaigns had created an undercurrent of unease. The city's population was roughly 30% Muslim, 25% Catholic, with the remainder representing various faiths and secular viewpoints. For the most part, these communities had coexisted peacefully, but certain radical voices on all sides had been growing louder. As the morning progressed, an unusual crowd began gathering near the statue. Unlike the typical tourists and locals, this group carried banners and seemed organized. Their presence created ripples of curiosity among the regular square inhabitants, though no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. At exactly 9:47 a.m., a black sedan pulled up to the edge of Place Saint-Ferréol. From it emerged Imam Rashid al-Mansouri, a 34-year-old preacher who had gained notoriety across Europe for his controversial statements about religious symbols in public spaces. Al-Mansouri was not from Marseille. He had traveled from Brussels specifically for this day, accompanied by a small but vocal group of followers. Al-Mansouri was a complex figure. Born in Morocco, educated in London, he held degrees in both Islamic theology and European history. His supporters saw him as a brave voice against what they perceived as Christian dominance in secular spaces. His critics viewed him as a dangerous provocateur who exploited religious tensions for personal gain. What was undeniable was his ability to command attention and generate controversy wherever he appeared. The preacher wore traditional white robes and carried a wireless microphone, suggesting this was a planned event. His followers, approximately 25 individuals, arranged themselves in a semicircle around the base of the Virgin Mary statue. They carried signs written in French, Arabic, and English, with messages calling for true secular spaces and end religious favoritism. Marie Dubois watched nervously from her flower stall, her weathered hands clutching her morning coffee. She had witnessed many demonstrations in the square over the years, but something about this group's intensity made her uneasy. Other vendors began closing their stalls or moving their merchandise away from the statue area. What happens next will show you how quickly peaceful coexistence can shatter in our interconnected world. Al-Mansouri tested his microphone, the sharp feedback echoing off the surrounding buildings. Windows opened as curious residents peered down at the gathering crowd. Social media notifications began pinging across smartphones as the first photos and videos started circulating online. The hashtag Marseille Square would trend globally within hours, but at this moment, it was still a local disturbance. The preacher's voice carried across the square as he began speaking in fluent French, then switching to Arabic, then to English. His message was clear. The statue represented an unfair privileging of Christian symbols in what should be a secular public space in a diverse democracy. He argued that such displays were remnants of colonial thinking that had no place in modern, multicultural France. Local police had been notified of the gathering, but French law protected peaceful demonstration rights. Officers positioned themselves at the square's entrances, monitoring the situation but not interfering. The crowd of onlookers grew larger, with people pulling out phones to record what was happening. As al-Mansuri's speech intensified, his followers began chanting in unison. The sound reverberated off the ancient buildings, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm that drew more curious onlookers. What had started as a small demonstration was quickly becoming a significant public spectacle. At 10:23 a.m., Imam al-Mansuri made a declaration that would change everything. Speaking into his microphone, he announced that words alone were insufficient to address what he called the systematic marginalization of non-Christian communities. He declared his intention to remove the statue physically, claiming it was an act of civil disobedience comparable to historical protests against injustice. The crowd's energy shifted dramatically. Some supporters cheered, while others appeared uncomfortable with this escalation. Among the growing crowd of onlookers, angry voices began shouting back. Marie Dubois dropped her coffee cup, the ceramic shattering on the cobblestones as she called out to the Virgin Mary in Provençal, as if warning her of impending danger. Al-Mansuri approached the statue with a sledgehammer that one of his followers had concealed in a large bag. The sight of the tool sent shockwaves through the crowd. Several people immediately called the police, while others began filming more intently, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The first blow struck the statue's base with a resounding crack that seemed to echo through the entire square. Chunks of marble scattered across the cobblestones. The sound was visceral, almost physical in its impact on those present. Some onlookers gasped, others began crying, and a few started pushing forward to intervene. What you're about to witness challenges everything we think we know about cause and effect in our modern world. Al-Mansuri continued striking the statue methodically. Each blow was accompanied by declarations about liberation from oppressive symbols and the need for true equality. His followers chanted religious phrases, while the growing crowd of locals shouted their own responses in French, Arabic, and other languages that reflected Marseille's diversity. The statue's right hand, which had been extended in a gesture of blessing, broke away after the seventh blow. It crashed to the ground with a sound that seemed to silence the entire square for a moment. In that brief quiet, everyone present could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching. Police arrived in 3 vehicles, but the officers faced a complex situation. Al-Mansuri's actions were clearly illegal, but attempting to arrest him in the middle of an increasingly agitated crowd could spark wider violence. They called for backup and attempted to establish a perimeter around the statue area. As the 10th blow struck the statue's face, creating a deep crack that ran from her forehead to her chin, something extraordinary happened. The sky, which had been brilliant blue with scattered clouds, suddenly began darkening. Meteorologists would later explain it as an unusual but natural weather pattern, but to those present in the square, the timing seemed impossible to dismiss as mere coincidence. The temperature dropped noticeably. Birds that had been chirping in the plane trees fell silent. Even the traffic noise from surrounding streets seemed muted. In that moment, as marble dust settled around the damaged statue, everyone in Place Saint Ferriol felt they were witnessing something far beyond a simple act of vandalism. The weather phenomenon that began as Al-Mansuri struck the statue's face intensified rapidly. What had started as darkening clouds transformed into an unprecedented meteorological event that would be studied by atmospheric scientists for years to come. The temperature plummeted from 28 degrees Celsius to 15 degrees Celsius in less than 5 minutes, a rate of change that defied normal weather patterns for the Mediterranean region. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a climatologist at Aix-Marseille University, happened to be having coffee at Café des Arts on the square's northern edge. She immediately began documenting the atmospheric changes on her phone, noting wind patterns that seemed to spiral around the statue specifically. The meteorological data she collected would later become crucial evidence in the scientific investigation of the day's events. Lightning began flickering within the rapidly forming storm clouds, but it was unlike any electrical activity the residents had ever witnessed. Instead of the typical bright white flashes, the lightning appeared to have an unusual golden hue. Thunder followed, but the sound seemed to resonate at a frequency that people felt in their chests rather than simply hearing with their ears. Al-Mansuri paused in his destruction, looking up at the darkening sky. For the first time since arriving in the square, uncertainty crossed his face. His followers stopped chanting, their voices replaced by nervous murmurs as they watched the clouds swirling directly overhead. The growing crowd of onlookers pressed closer together, seeking comfort in numbers as the atmosphere became increasingly ominous. Scientists still can't fully explain what happened next, but the evidence was captured by dozens of cameras. Rain began falling, but it wasn't ordinary precipitation. The droplets were unusually large and seemed to fall in patterns that defied the wind currents. More strangely, the rain appeared to avoid certain areas entirely while drenching others. The statue itself, despite being at the center of the storm, remained completely dry, while Al-Mansuri and his followers were soaked within seconds. Marie Dubois, sheltering under her stall's awning, noticed that her flowers, particularly the white roses she had placed near the statue that morning, began blooming more vibrantly despite the storm. The phenomenon was captured on multiple phones and would later be analyzed by botanists who struggled to provide conventional explanations. The wind intensified, but its patterns were chaotic and localized. Papers and debris swirled around the square in tight circles, while trees just 50 meters away remained barely stirred. The sledgehammer in Al-Mansuri's hands became increasingly difficult to control as gusts seemed to push against his efforts to continue striking the statue. Police reinforcements arrived, but even the officers were distracted by the unprecedented weather. Sergeant Michel Blanc, a 20-year veteran of the Marseille police force, would later describe the atmosphere as charged with something beyond electricity. The static in their radio communications made coordination nearly impossible. Social media was exploding with videos and photos from the scene. The hashtags #miraculousweather and #MarseilleStorm began trending globally as people around the world watched live streams of the unfolding events. News helicopters were grounded due to the dangerous wind conditions, but satellite imagery captured the storm formation in real time. As Al-Mansuri raised the sledgehammer for what would have been the final blow to topple the statue completely, a massive gust of wind struck him with such force that he was lifted off his feet and thrown backward onto the cobblestones. The hammer flew from his hands, landing harmlessly several meters away. What happened next defied every scientific explanation and challenged the worldviews of everyone present. As Al-Mansuri lay on the cobblestones, dazed from his fall, the damaged statue began exhibiting phenomena that would be debated by theologians, scientists, and philosophers for decades to come. Water began flowing from the statue's eyes. Not rainwater, but clear liquid that seemed to originate from within the marble itself. Dr. Sarah Chen, a materials scientist from the French National Center for Scientific Research who arrived on scene within an hour, would later confirm that marble is not porous enough to allow such fluid flow, making the phenomenon physically impossible according to established scientific principles. The liquid flowing from the statue's eyes was collected by several witnesses, including Marie Dubois, who instinctively held out her empty coffee cup. Laboratory analysis would later reveal the substance to be pure water with trace minerals consistent with natural spring water, but containing no pollutants or chemicals typical of urban precipitation. The water also exhibited unusual properties under spectral analysis that scientists couldn't replicate. Al-Mansuri struggled to his feet, his white robes muddy and torn. The confidence he had displayed throughout the morning was completely gone, replaced by visible confusion and what witnesses described as genuine fear. His followers had scattered, some running from the square entirely, others pressing themselves against buildings as if seeking shelter from something beyond the storm. The next 60 seconds changed how millions of people around the world think about faith and science. The storm intensified around the statue while simultaneously creating a perfect circle of calm approximately 10 meters in diameter centered on the Virgin Mary. Within this calm zone, the rain stopped entirely, the wind died to nothing, and an unusual warmth could be felt despite the dropping temperature elsewhere in the square. Several witnesses reported seeing what appeared to be subtle light emanating from the statue itself, though this was difficult to capture clearly on camera due to the storm conditions. Father Antoine Moreau from the nearby Cathedral de la Major had been called to the scene by parishioners. As he approached the statue, carrying holy water and wearing his ceremonial robes despite the dangerous weather, he fell to his knees at the edge of the calm zone. His prayers, spoken in Latin, seemed to resonate with unusual clarity despite the chaos surrounding them. The damaged areas of the statue began exhibiting another impossible phenomenon. The cracks that Al-Mansuri's sledgehammer had created started closing visibly, not healing completely but becoming less pronounced. The marble dust that had scattered across the cobblestones began moving against the wind, flowing back toward the statue's base like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Dr. Rodriguez continued documenting everything with scientific precision, but her academic training couldn't process what she was observing. The meteorological instruments she had in her university bag showed readings that contradicted each other and defied atmospheric physics. Wind speed, barometric pressure, and temperature measurements fluctuated in patterns that her decades of experience suggested were impossible. Al-Mansuri attempted to leave the square, but found himself unable to move beyond the statue's immediate vicinity. Each time he tried to walk away, he was drawn back by what he later described as an invisible force. His distress was evident as he called out in Arabic, his words a mixture of prayers and pleas that witnesses with knowledge of the language translated as requests for forgiveness. The global audience watching through social media streams reached millions as major news networks picked up the story. The images being broadcast were so unprecedented that many viewers initially assumed they were witnessing an elaborate hoax or movie production. However, the multiple angles, live weather data, and growing number of credible witnesses made such explanations increasingly implausible. As the phenomenon entered its second hour, the effects began extending beyond the immediate area around the statue. Throughout Marseille, reports emerged of unusual occurrences that seemed connected to the events in Place Saint-Ferréol. Hospital emergency rooms reported a sudden decrease in admissions, with several patients experiencing unexpected improvements in chronic conditions. The connection would never be scientifically proven, but the timing was difficult to dismiss. Al-Mansuri underwent the most dramatic transformation. The man who had arrived with sledgehammer and revolutionary fervor was now visibly shaken. His entire demeanor changed. Witnesses reported that he began speaking to the statue directly, alternating between Arabic and French, his words a mixture of apology and confusion. The microphone he had used for his inflammatory speech now amplified what sounded like genuine remorse. Dr. Elena Rodriguez noticed that her scientific instruments were registering energy signatures unlike anything in meteorological literature. The electromagnetic readings suggested the presence of fields that didn't correspond to any known natural phenomena. Her equipment, designed to measure atmospheric conditions, was detecting patterns that seemed almost intentional rather than random. The crowd that had gathered was now several hundred strong, with people arriving from across the city despite the dangerous weather conditions. Many came out of curiosity after seeing social media posts, but others seemed drawn by something more profound. Religious leaders from various faiths arrived, including Imam Hassan Bouamar from the Grande Mosquée de Marseille, who had been Al-Mansuri's most vocal critic within the local Muslim community. What you're witnessing reveals how quickly our understanding of reality can be challenged in our modern world. The interaction between Al-Mansuri and Imam Bouamar provided one of the day's most powerful moments. The local religious leader approached the fallen preacher with compassion rather than condemnation, helping him to his feet and speaking quietly in Arabic. Their conversation, partially captured by nearby cameras, centered on concepts of forgiveness, understanding, and the danger of extremism in any form. Marie Dubois, despite her age and the dangerous conditions, refused to leave her flower stall. She had witnessed too much history in this square to abandon it during what she sensed was its most significant moment. Her flowers, particularly the white roses, continued displaying unusual vitality despite the storm. Several people reported that the floral scent had intensified and seemed to provide a calming effect amid the chaos. The statue's weeping intensified, with the flow of water from its eyes becoming more pronounced. The liquid collected at the base created small pools that reflected light in unusual patterns. Some witnesses reported seeing images in these reflections, though video evidence of this phenomenon remained unclear due to the lighting conditions and camera angles. Father Moreau began leading prayers in multiple languages, joined by religious figures from various faiths who had arrived at the scene. The interfaith gathering around the statue created a powerful visual that would become iconic in later coverage of the event. Their combined voices seemed to harmonize despite the different languages and traditions they represented. The damaged areas of the statue continued their impossible restoration. Cracks sealed themselves progressively, and the marble dust that had scattered across the square formed small streams flowing back to fill the gouges left by the sledgehammer. Material scientists would later struggle to explain how marble could exhibit such self-repair properties without any external intervention. As emergency services established better control of the scene, medical personnel began treating Al-Mansuri, who appeared to be in shock. His vital signs were stable, but his psychological state suggested trauma beyond what would be expected from a simple fall. Paramedics noted that he kept staring at the statue and repeating phrases in Arabic that translators identified as traditional prayers of repentance. News of the events in Marseille spread across social media platforms faster than traditional news outlets could process the story. Within 3 hours, #MarseilleStorm, #StatueWeeps, and #MiracleOrScience were trending globally in multiple languages. Videos from the scene were viewed millions of times, sparking intense debates about faith, science, and the nature of unexplained phenomena in the digital age. Religious communities worldwide responded with a mixture of awe, skepticism, and deep theological discussion. The Vatican issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging the reports while calling for thorough investigation before making any official declarations. Islamic scholars debated the theological implications of the events, with some seeing divine intervention while others emphasized the importance of rational analysis. Scientific institutions mobilized rapidly to investigate the phenomena. The French National Center for Scientific Research dispatched teams of meteorologists, physicists, and materials scientists to study the ongoing effects. International colleagues offered collaboration, recognizing that the events challenged fundamental understanding in multiple disciplines. Initial data collection suggested they were dealing with something unprecedented in scientific literature. Al-Mansuri was taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation, but not before making a public statement that would be broadcast worldwide. Speaking to gathered media, he renounced his previous inflammatory rhetoric and called for dialogue rather than destruction. His transformation from destructive provocateur to advocate for interfaith understanding became one of the day's most compelling storylines. The global response to what happened next reveals the deep divisions and surprising unity in our interconnected world. Social media reactions ranged from profound spiritual awakening to determined skepticism. Hashtags like #FakeNews and #ModernMiracle trended simultaneously, reflecting the polarized response to unexplained phenomena in the digital age. Debunkers worked frantically to identify possible hoaxes or natural explanations, while believers shared the videos as evidence of divine intervention. Major news networks struggled with how to report the story. The phenomena were too well documented to ignore, but too extraordinary to explain using conventional journalistic frameworks. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and other international outlets sent their most experienced correspondents to Marseille, while their science reporters worked with experts to provide rational analysis of the documented events. Local authorities faced unprecedented challenges in managing both the ongoing situation and the global attention it had generated. Marseille's mayor called for calm while acknowledging that the city was experiencing something beyond normal civic administration. Police cordoned off the square to protect both the statue and the growing crowds of pilgrims, tourists, and curious visitors arriving from around the world. The weather phenomenon continued for several more hours, defying meteorological predictions. The storm remained localized to the immediate area around the statue, while the rest of Marseille experienced normal August weather. Satellite imagery showed the unusual cloud formation as a tight spiral centered precisely on Place Saint-Ferréol, a pattern that atmospheric scientists couldn't explain using conventional weather models. Dr. Rodriguez established a temporary research station in the square, collecting continuous data on the atmospheric anomalies. Her preliminary findings suggested energy patterns that didn't match any known natural or artificial sources. The electromagnetic signatures were particularly puzzling, resembling those typically associated with much larger weather systems but compressed into an area less than 1 square kilometer. Hospital reports throughout the city continued documenting unusual occurrences. Emergency room visits decreased significantly, while several chronic patients reported unexpected improvements in their conditions. Medical professionals emphasized that correlation didn't imply causation, but the statistical anomaly was difficult to dismiss entirely. The interfaith gathering around the statue grew throughout the day. Religious leaders who had never spoken before found themselves working together to maintain peace and provide spiritual guidance to the crowds. This spontaneous cooperation between different faith communities became another significant aspect of the day's events, suggesting that extraordinary circumstances could bridge even deep religious divisions. Within 24 hours of the incident, an unprecedented international scientific investigation began in Marseille. The European Space Agency provided satellite data, while universities across multiple continents offered expertise in fields ranging from atmospheric physics to materials science. The investigation would become one of the most thoroughly documented studies of unexplained phenomena in modern history. Dr. Marcus Weber, a renowned physicist from CERN, arrived to study the electromagnetic anomalies that continued around the statue. His initial measurements detected energy patterns that didn't correspond to any known particles or forces. The readings suggested the presence of fields that interacted with conventional matter in ways that challenged established physics, requiring entirely new theoretical frameworks to explain. The marble samples collected from the statue presented equally puzzling evidence. Laboratory analysis revealed that the stone had undergone molecular changes that were impossible under normal conditions. The self-repair phenomenon observed during the incident had left the marble with enhanced structural integrity and unusual crystalline properties that materials scientists couldn't reproduce artificially. Al-Mansouri, after his hospital evaluation, requested a meeting with religious leaders from multiple faiths. The gathering, held at the Grande Mosquée de Marseille, brought together figures who had been theological opponents for decades. Their discussions, partially open to media coverage, focused on the dangers of extremism and the potential for spiritual understanding across traditional boundaries. The scientific findings challenged everything experts thought they knew about the physical world. Water samples from the statues, weeping, underwent extensive analysis at laboratories across Europe. The liquid exhibited properties that defied conventional chemistry, including molecular structures that shouldn't have been stable under normal conditions. Most intriguingly, the water seemed to retain these unusual properties even when removed from the statue's vicinity and mixed with other substances. Meteorological data from the event provided equally challenging evidence. The storm's behavior violated fundamental principles of atmospheric dynamics, with wind patterns that seemed to operate independently of pressure differentials and temperature gradients. Computer models attempting to recreate the weather phenomenon consistently failed, suggesting the involvement of factors not accounted for in current scientific understanding. Religious scholars from around the world descended on Marseille to study the theological implications of the events. The Catholic Church initiated a formal investigation process similar to those used for miracle verification, while Islamic theologians debated whether the phenomena represented divine intervention or natural occurrences that humans simply didn't yet understand. Other faith traditions contributed their own perspectives, creating an unprecedented interfaith dialogue. The psychological impact of the events extended far beyond those physically present. Mental health professionals reported increased inquiries about spiritual experiences and existential questions. The visual documentation of seemingly impossible phenomena challenged many people's fundamental assumptions about reality, leading to what psychologists termed paradigm adjustment anxiety in some individuals. Marie Du Bois became an unexpected spokesperson for the witnesses, her decades of daily interaction with the statue lending credibility to her accounts. International media sought her perspective, and her simple, heartfelt descriptions of the events resonated with audiences who found the scientific explanations too complex or incomplete to satisfy their need for understanding. The flowers around the statue continued displaying unusual vitality weeks after the incident. Botanists studying the phenomenon discovered that the plants showed enhanced cellular activity and increased resistance to environmental stress. The effects gradually diminished over time but remained detectable for months, providing ongoing subjects for scientific investigation. Government officials struggled with how to classify and respond to the events. The phenomena clearly had occurred, but they didn't fit into existing categories for natural disasters, security threats, or cultural incidents. New protocols had to be developed for managing locations where unexplained phenomena continued manifesting, creating precedents that would influence future responses to similar occurrences. 1 year after the events in Place Saint-Ferréol, Marseille had become one of the world's most visited pilgrimage and research destinations. The statue, fully restored through the mysterious self-repair phenomenon, continued attracting visitors from every continent and faith tradition. The city had adapted to accommodate both spiritual seekers and scientific researchers, creating a unique environment where faith and investigation coexisted. Al-Mansouri's transformation remained one of the most compelling aspects of the story's legacy. He had renounced his previous extremist positions and dedicated himself to interfaith dialogue and peaceful conflict resolution. His autobiography, The Sledgehammer and the Miracle, became an international bestseller and contributed significantly to global discussions about religious tolerance and the dangers of radicalization. The scientific investigation continued producing groundbreaking discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about physics, chemistry, and meteorology. Several Nobel Prize-winning researchers involved in the study acknowledged that the Marseille phenomena had forced them to reconsider basic principles they had accepted throughout their careers. New theoretical frameworks were being developed to account for the documented evidence. Dr. Rodriguez established the Marseille Institute for Atmospheric Anomalies, which became a leading research center for unusual weather phenomena worldwide. Her work on the energy patterns observed during the incident led to breakthrough discoveries in renewable energy technology, demonstrating how investigating unexplained phenomena could yield practical applications beyond their immediate mystery. The ultimate questions raised by these events continue challenging how we understand our world and our place in it. Religious communities globally reported increased cooperation and dialogue following the Marseille events. The image of faith leaders from different traditions standing together around the weeping statue became an icon for interfaith understanding. Several international peace initiatives traced their origins to the conversations sparked by what happened in that small square in southern France. Marie Du Bois, now 68, continued her daily flower arrangements at the statue's base, but her simple ritual had gained international recognition. Her flower stall became a symbol of how ordinary faith and extraordinary events could intersect. She established a foundation supporting interfaith dialogue and scientific research, funded by donations from visitors who found meaning in her steadfast presence during the remarkable day. The tourism and pilgrimage industry in Marseille adapted to accommodate millions of annual visitors seeking to witness the location of the unprecedented phenomena. However, city officials worked carefully to maintain the square's authentic character and ensure that commercialization didn't diminish the significance of what had occurred there. Academic institutions worldwide incorporated the Marseille case study into curricula ranging from physics to theology to conflict resolution. The events provided a real-world example of how unexplained phenomena could challenge established knowledge while simultaneously bringing people together across traditional divisions. Universities offered interdisciplinary courses examining the scientific, religious, and social implications of the incident. The ongoing research revealed that subtle anomalies persisted around the statue, though they were less dramatic than those observed during the initial incident. Sensitive instruments continued detecting unusual electromagnetic patterns, and the statue's marble maintained its enhanced properties. These persistent effects ensured that scientific investigation would continue for decades, potentially yielding further discoveries about the nature of reality itself. The events in Marseille's place Saint Ferréol demonstrated how quickly our understanding of the world can be challenged and how extraordinary circumstances can reveal both human capacity for destruction and transformation. Whether viewed through the lens of faith, science, or human psychology, what happened on August 15, 2025, continues inspiring questions about the nature of reality, the power of belief, and our interconnectedness in an increasingly complex world. The statue still weeps occasionally, though less frequently than in those first remarkable days. Scientists continue their investigations, believers continue their pilgrimages, and the world continues grappling with the implications of what happened when one man's act of destruction encountered something far greater than anyone could have anticipated.